This is part 2 of the National Geographic expedition to Antarctica. Please see part 1 for days 1 through 6. This video will cover days 7 through 12. There are links in the description below to all videos related to this magnificent trip. The second part of this journey was as glorious as the first. Day 7. On this day we had a later start and only one planned excursion since we were traveling farther between stops. During the morning, they offered a lecture on various historical periods in Antarctica history, including tales of Captain Cook and Ernest Shackleton. After lunch, I went on a tour of the mechanics of the ship. They allowed small groups to sign up and visit the lower decks. I was astounded at the computerized sophistication of the ship. I don't know what I was expecting, but there were 2 whole levels of machines, computers, compressors, you name it. The engineers in our group had lots of questions that went way over my head. By this time, the ship had arrived at Michelson Harbor, Dehano Island. We then went on a zodiac excursion. We saw penguins, a sea lion, and lots of birds. Since it was our only outing that day, it was a longer outing, about 90 minutes. It was, of course, beautiful. Here are a few pictures from this excursion. On this night, the information session included the staff acting out a story about stranded explorers. It was fun as well as informative. After dinner, the ship drove through the Sierra Cove icebergs. I took a ton of photos of the sunset and ice. Then back in my room, I realized we were passing some more amazing icebergs, one that had an arch. You had to wonder how long it had been like this and how much longer it will stay preserved. I grabbed my camera and took a bunch of photos from my balcony. After a shower, I came back out and there was a humpback whale surfacing right outside my window. I once again grabbed my camera and took a few more photos. It's amazing to watch the whales. Day 8. The ship drove through the Lemire Channel, which is supposed to be pretty amazing. However, the visibility wasn't great that day. The ship arrived in Port Charcot on Booth Island. The first excursion I took on this day was to a penguin colony. It was a short excursion with a little hiking. After seeing so many penguins, you come to appreciate why they are such a beloved creature. They just seem to have so much personality in the way they walk, swim, and interact. Just watching them waddle up a hill is entertaining, or stand on the edge of ice debating on whether to dive or not. Wait for it. Maybe not. Back on the ship, we ate lunch as the boat moved to Peterman Island. I took a zodiac excursion and we saw some penguins doing what they call synchronized feeding, and it was awesome to watch. Just listen for a second to the sounds they make. The penguins propel themselves out of the water in what they call porpoising. Another traveler took this amazing photo. There were so many penguins swirling around. Evidently, what you see on top is only a fraction of the amount that are below. Later, we drove around some geometric icebergs. I have to say, each excursion offered a new and exhilarating perspective on the continent. Day 9. Sadly, this was our last day on the continent. The ship was heading to Orne Harbor when they woke us at about 4:30 a.m. with an announcement that there was a group of killer whales in the vicinity. Might I remind you that it was almost always light during our expedition, so it was bright daylight at 4:30 a.m. I stepped out on my balcony and whales were all around and right next to the ship. It was evidently unusual to see this breed of killer whales, so we had one more box to check. I ate breakfast and then we went on an outing in which we hiked a hill by switchbacking up to the top. Here's the hike we took. It looks a little daunting, but it really wasn't difficult. There were some chinstrap penguins at the top that were nesting, and there were panoramic views of the jagged, snowy mountains and glaciers that were awe-inspiring. I descended and took more pictures of the mountains from sea level, then went back to the ship. After lunch, we had our final zodiac cruise that lasted about 90 minutes. The setting was so pristine, ethereal, spectacular, and gorgeous. It felt somewhat surreal. The water was quiet, and the broken ice throughout created an almost eerie scene. For most of the time, we followed whales and tried to get close without disturbing them. Other zodiacs had a front row view of whales surfacing right next to their boats, but our zodiac was farther away. However, we did see some whales surface periodically. It was so exhilarating to see these huge mammals quietly rise and submerge. Back on board, there was an info session they interrupted with an announcement that more killer whales were spotted. So they delayed dinner by 30 minutes and we all went to the bridge. There were a mass of them again, and we followed them for about 30 minutes until the ship headed north to the Drake Passage. After dinner, I planned to retire early, but they made one late announcement that we were passing by our last beautiful iceberg. It was one final, exquisite look at the beauty of Antarctica. Day 10. Since we were out in the Drake Passage, our wake-up call was a little later than usual. The seas were starting to get rockier and rockier, much worse than our first crossing. After breakfast, they had an info session on Antarctica scientific research. Following that, there was a mandatory disembarkation meeting which gave us some information on the process. After lunch, they had more info sessions. It was followed by a happy hour, a short briefing, and then dinner. After dinner, the staff showcased their hidden talents by putting on a show in the lounge that was quite raucous and fun. Everyone was up and dancing. The seas had been pretty rocky all day and had gotten progressively worse throughout the evening. There were definitely passengers that were seasick. Fortunately, I was not one of them and got to test my dancing skills on a severely rocking boat. I partied with the staff and passengers and had a lot of fun. Back in my room, I tried to sleep, but the rocking of the ship was pretty dramatic. I didn't get seasick, but I didn't get much sleep. Day 11. They let us sleep in this morning and had a brunch planned for 10 a.m. Let me take this moment to talk again about the fellow solo travelers on board. There were quite a few of us. We enjoyed sharing meals, photography, and travel stories. The rest of the day consisted of info sessions, a happy hour, and a slideshow of the passengers' photos. After some thanks and goodbyes, we had dinner. At that point, we had docked in Ushuaia, and several groups of us took a brisk walk into town and moseyed into some shops. We had one last night on the boat in the Ushuaia harbor. Day 12. They woke us up at 6 a.m. Our luggage needed to be out in the halls by our door by then. We ate breakfast on the ship, then were bused to the Ushuaia Maritime Museum. I'll cover Ushuaia in a separate video in order to keep this one short, but we'll share that Ushuaia is a beautiful little town surrounded by majestic snow-capped mountains. Lindblad Expeditions had reserved a room in the Albatross Hotel in the heart of Ushuaia for us to have some food and relax while waiting for the bus to the airport. We were also allowed to walk around Ushuaia for a couple hours, which we did. Around 11 a.m. they started boarding the buses, took us to the airport, where we waited some more, then boarded the charter flight to Santiago. Now let me address the senior travelers out there. I saw many seniors on this trip who seemed to be above average in terms of fitness level. However, I think anyone could enjoy this expedition as there were always choices. For solo travelers, there were solo cabins offered, although the price was still pretty expensive. After talking with other passengers, it appeared that the solo cabin pricing was not consistent, so you might want to inquire to get the best deal. It was a very friendly environment for the solo travelers. We all made new friends and enjoyed the companionship. Now, it was very difficult to condense this expansive trip into 2 short videos. It really was beyond my best expectations. I have included links to videos related to this trip in the description below. I would highly recommend National Geographic for visiting Antarctica, and I'll explain the reasons why it is superior in my video on the National Geographic Resolution. And if you would like to follow more of my senior and solo travels, please click subscribe below. Cheers!